People are endlessly fascinated by the world of ancient Judaism, the world that gave birth to such mysterious sectarian movements as the Enochians, responsible for the books of Enoch, and the Essenes, who are connected with the Dead Sea Scrolls. The Jewish world that also gave birth to such figures as John the Baptist, and of course Jesus of Nazareth. People understand instinctively that these illustrious characters were Jews, but they also suspect that this was a different breed of Judaism than what has come down to us today. And that suspicion is probably right, because there was no standard Judaism back in the days when the great Temple of Jerusalem was still standing. Ancient Judaism was in fact a house divided. It was split between what we can call Enochic Judaism, driven by the apocalyptic revelations contained in the books of Enoch and other kindred texts, and Zadokite Judaism, named after a rival priestly class, the so-called Sons of Zadok, who exercised temporal power in Jerusalem's great temple. The Enochians were themselves Levites who carried their own priestly pedigree, and we can view them as an opposition party within the temple elite. They were powerless, yet charismatic visionaries in opposition to the powerful, pragmatic priesthood of the Zadokites. But rather than being relegated to the sidelines, Enochic Judaism actually flourished alongside Zadokite Judaism. It's a pity we don't know what kind of metaphysical practices they cultivated, or how they entered into higher levels of mystical meaning, but the visions that were recorded in the books of Enoch and kindred literature must have derived from deep meditation of some kind. Some have pointed out that it was standard practice across the whole of the ancient world to use intoxicants and hallucinogenics in religious practice, because such substances helped practitioners to lose themselves and enter states of being that involved receiving dreams and omens. Such practices can be thought of as an entire communication system with angels, with an assortment of divine spirits, and if the ancient Enochian visionaries were lucky, with the God of Israel.
I saw the paths of the angels. I saw at the end of the earth the firmament of the heaven above. And I proceeded and saw a place which burns day and night, where there are 7 mountains of magnificent stones, 3 towards the east, and 3 towards the south. And those towards the east were of colored stone, and one of pearl, and one of jacinth, and those towards the south of red stone. But the middle one reached to heaven like the throne of God, of alabaster, and the summit of the throne was of sapphire. And I saw a flaming fire. And beyond these mountains is a region at the end of the great earth. There, the heavens were completed. And I saw a deep abyss, with columns of heavenly fire, and among them I saw columns of fire fall, which were beyond measure alike towards the height and towards the depth. And beyond that abyss I saw a place which had no firmament of the heaven above, and no firmly founded earth beneath it. There was no water upon it, and no birds, but it was a waste and horrible place. I saw there 7 stars like great burning mountains.
Over time, Enochic Judaism became wildly popular, with broad-based appeal. After all, they were experts at channeling God. And we can even think of the Enochians as another name for the Essene party, which flourished between the 3rd century BCE and the turn of the Common Era. For Zadokite Judaism, the world was viewed as basically good, until evil came about from the sin of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. At its heart was the law of Moses, the Torah, as well as the Jerusalem temple and the priesthood. Multiple rituals were essential for keeping in place the sacred boundaries that preserve the cosmos itself.
The Lord said to Moses, "Give this command to the Israelites and say to them, Make sure that you present to me at the appointed time my food offerings as an aroma pleasing to me. Say to them, This is the food offering you are to present to the Lord. 2 lambs a year old without defect, as a regular burnt offering each day.
But the Enochians had a different worldview entirely. They saw evil arising when a group of wayward angels who descended to earth and seduced human women resulted in a hopelessly corrupt world order.
And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men and beget us children.
All of this is set forth in a series of ancient writings, suppressed and excluded from the Bible, including the Book of Watchers, the Astronomical Book, the Animal Apocalypse, and a text known as Aramaic Levi. This anti-Zadokite movement focused its entire theology on the biblical patriarch Enoch and his revelations, rather than on Moses and his law, his Torah. Oddly enough, it seems that some of the Zadokites later joined the rival Enochians, becoming the earliest manifestation of the Essene movement. The most likely reason for this has to do with a band of Jewish freedom fighters known as the Maccabees. Between the years 168 and 163 BCE, they led a successful revolt against the foreign oppressors of those days, the Seleucid dynasty of Syria, who had essentially declared war against the Jewish faith. The Maccabees liberated Jerusalem and restored the defiled temple, initiating a feast celebrated today as Hanukkah. One of them, named Jonathan, was subsequently given the title of High Priest via a letter sent by a rival pretender to the Seleucid throne named Alexander Balas.
King Alexander, to his brother Jonathan, greetings. We have heard about you, that you are a mighty warrior and worthy to be our friend. And so we have appointed you today to be the high priest of your nation. You are to be called the king's friend, and you are to take our side and keep friendship with us. I am also sending you a purple robe and a golden crown.
It's true that Jonathan was from a priestly family, the house of Hashmon, but he was not a Zadokite and was technically not eligible to become high priest. Nevertheless, he established a dynasty, the Hasmonean dynasty, who from that time forward ruled as high priests. Most of the Zadokites rallied to them, becoming the core of the Sadducee party. But other Zadokites felt disenfranchised, believing that the temple had been corrupted by an illegitimate priesthood. At some point, they essentially took over the Essene Enochic tradition, which by now had abandoned hope on the material plane and looked instead to visions of the end of days and eschatological deliverance by purely supernatural intervention. That was the only way they could envision the reestablishment of the legitimate priesthood. So much of the story of the Enochians is guesswork, but it seems likely that there was a split among their ranks. One radical group of these Zadokites, turned Essenes, led by a mysterious figure known as the Teacher of Righteousness, abandoned society altogether and moved to the western shore of the Dead Sea, establishing their own community at a place known today as Qumran. This splinter group of Essenes, likely numbering about 200, were the ones who produced the Dead Sea Scrolls, an ancient library of biblical and non-biblical texts discovered only by accident in the year 1947 by a Bedouin shepherd boy looking for a lost goat. They described their own role in the Dead Sea Scroll known as the Damascus Rule.
The sons of Zadok are the chosen of Israel, those called by my name, who stood up at the end of days.
The parent group of Essenes, at least 4,000 strong, remained scattered across the length and breadth of the land, one stream of which ultimately flowed into the ancient Jesus movement. It's hard to call Jesus himself a full-fledged Essene, since most of what he says has a lot in common with the great sages of rabbinic Judaism as we know it today. But there are other aspects of Jesus' teaching that are hauntingly similar to the ideas of the Enochians. For example, he seems to have had a real antipathy toward the Jerusalem temple, especially when he turned over the tables of the money changers and denounced their practices.
Then he went into the temple and began to drive out those who bought and sold in it, saying to them, "It is written, 'My house is a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves.'"
He was strongly at odds with the Sadducean priesthood who ruled the temple and controlled the sacrificial system. And there was an apocalyptic tone to some of his teachings, as he seemingly predicted the coming destruction of the city of Jerusalem and the holy sanctuary itself.
Do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another, that shall not be thrown down. For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been, since the beginning of the world until this time. No, nor ever will be, and unless those days were shortened, no flesh would be saved, but for the elect's sake those days will be shortened.
Like the other Essene groups, Jesus was an outsider, but he appears to have disagreed harshly with the Dead Sea sect and their theological exclusivism, including their characterization of themselves as sons of light.
The sons of this age are wiser than the sons of light.
He didn't care much for their seclusion from society either, preferring instead the company of so-called publicans and sinners. But after his crucifixion at the hands of the Romans, the movement he left behind seems to have drifted much more toward Essene circles. Many of the early Judeo-Christians apparently lived communally, like the Dead Sea sect. Like the Essenes, who believed the Jerusalem temple to be defiled, they thought of themselves as God's spiritual temple. We find this expressed in the Dead Sea Scroll called the Community Rule.
A temple for Israel and a holy of holies. The tested wall, the precious cornerstone whose foundations shall neither be shaken nor swayed. A blameless and true house in Israel.
We also find it in the New Testament writings of Paul the Apostle.
Do you not know that you are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwells in you? If anyone defiles the temple of God, God will destroy him. For the temple of God is holy, which temple you are.
Paul embraced something else common to the Essenes, an idea known as predestination. The Dead Sea Scrolls declare that both the righteous and the wicked have been chosen by divine decree from the foundation of the world.
Among mortals, God gave this salvation to those whom he elected for their eternal possession, and let them participate in the lot of the holy ones. And with the sons of heaven he combined their assembly, thereby forming the council of the community.
Paul echoes similar ideas in his own epistles.
For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the likeness of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. And those he predestined, he also called. Those he called, he also justified. Those he justified, he also glorified.
Something else found in Paul's writings is Essene-style dualism, envisioning a cosmic war of good versus evil. As the Jesus movement evolved, it became even more focused on the end of days, that is, eschatology, seeing the present world as corrupt and evil. and reserved for destruction. There was a shared belief that good and evil forces were engaged in perennial conflict, but eventually would come the end time, preceded by identifiable signs. The Judeo-Christians anticipated the Battle of Armageddon, while the Dead Sea Scrolls depict a 40-year battle on earth and in the heavens, which will only end when God intervenes on behalf of the so-called sons of light.
In the seventh lot, the great hand of God shall overcome Belial and all the angels of his dominion, and all the men of his forces shall be destroyed forever.
A messianic prince on earth will lead the fight, and God will send his archangel Michael with a host of angels to end it. In spite of the coming tribulation, there remained hope that God will renew the world, resurrecting the righteous into a perfect heaven on earth. As history played out, the apocalypse that would save them from oppression never came. We can see how things evolved in the New Testament, as Paul writes in apocalyptic tones to the Thessalonians.
Do not become easily unsettled or alarmed by the teaching allegedly from us, that the day of the Lord has already come. Do not let anyone deceive you, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs, and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. He will oppose and will exalt himself over everything that is called God or is worshipped, so that he sets himself up in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God.
Both Paul and the Apostle John dilute the apocalyptic idea of the coming of the kingdom of God in favor of individual spiritual salvation, like that of the ancient Gnostics. But another kind of apocalypse did come. The Jews rose in rebellion against their Roman overlords in the year 66 of the Common Era, only to be crushed by the legions of Nero Caesar, led by the general Vespasian and his son Titus. The destruction of Jerusalem and the Temple in 70 CE led to the near extinction of Judaism itself. With no temple over which to rule, the Sadducee party disappeared. The Essenes, including those living at Qumran on the shores of the Dead Sea, vanished as well. The archaeology of the ancient settlement, conducted in the 1950s, revealed Roman arrowheads among the ruins, a subtle reminder of their likely fate, and fragments of one of their mystical scrolls, known as the Songs of Sabbath Sacrifice, were discovered in the following decade in the remains of the rocky precipice called Masada, where the last of the Jewish rebels held out for 2 years against the Romans, in the end perishing by their own hands.
These people died with this intention, that they would leave not so much as one soul among them all alive to be subject to the Romans. They then chose 10 men by lot out of them to slay all the rest, every one of whom laid himself down by his wife and children on the ground, and threw his arms about them, and they offered their necks to the stroke of those who by lot executed that melancholy office. And when these 10 had, without fear, slain them all, they made the same rule for casting lots for themselves, that he whose lot it was should first kill the other 9, and after all, should kill himself.
There were only 2 Jewish sects to survive the Great Revolt. One was a grassroots party with great popular appeal, known as the Pharisees, who became the forerunners of rabbinic Judaism as we know it today. The other sect were the Judeo-Christians, who were said to have fled to the east, to Transjordan, as well as into Western lands, including Rome itself. The Christians eventually forgot their connection with the Enochians and the Essenes, but many of the thoughts and ideas of Enochic Judaism abound in the pages of what became the New Testament. One famous biblical commentator went as far as to call Christianity Essenism that succeeded. Maybe just maybe, he was right.